if you don't understand why somebody thinks why they think, you don't have a shot to evangelize. You can't get to
Yeah.
that person. You have
Yeah.
to put your guard down, rationalize what they're thinking, so you can come to meet them and bring them to where you're at. If
Well, this is empathy.
I'm psychologist Dr. Bryan Violet, and in today's snapshot, we'll be looking at highlights from my conversation with Mitch Benes. He is my former roommate and longtime friend. We'll be talking about his career in advertising and his concerns about the Catholic Church and how advertising could actually help with evangelization and reaching out to people of different values, different beliefs, and different lifestyles. This is the Catholic Sinner Show.
That's awesome. Let me ask you this. Let's shift gears slightly. Let's pivot slightly. I'm interested to hear if you think there's a connection, or at least possible connection, if there isn't one yet, but maybe it's something that's ripe with opportunity here, between advertising and evangelization from a Catholic perspective. I think,
for sure.
I think we've come to a stalling point on a cultural level with evangelization. People don't want to hear anything about being Catholic, unless they're already Catholic. And, there's some rare cases where someone is really open to hearing a Catholic perspective. But in general, at a cultural level, I think a Catholic viewpoint is, at worst, silenced, at best, tolerated in a watered down form. So what do you think? Do you think advertising can help us evangelize?
Yeah, absolutely. Advertising, like, I think about this a lot just because, obviously I go to church every Sunday and I hear kind of the sermons from the priests, and a big topic of the priest sermons recently has been like how many people fall away from the church and how many people leave and how people don't want to hear the message and all these things. And I think about in myself, like, how a lot of times I don't even want to hear it. If I'm going to church every Sunday and I
Yeah.
don't want to hear it, what's somebody who has less interest going to think? What's somebody who is not as invested going to think? What's somebody who's not even in the church going to think? And I think, there's a couple of ways that the church specifically has focused on kind of solidifying the base and solidifying inside of who the community who's there right now, really making sure that they feel felt and heard. That is almost leading to us not being able to evangelize as easy. It's a lot of speaking to the choir.
It's an echo chamber.
Yeah, it's a bit of an echo chamber, right? It's one of those things where it happens a lot in advertising, where when you get to this point where you've kind of hit critical mass with the message and you only serve the people inside your community, you reach a level of stagnation and you have a bit of a hard time growing. And that's where I feel like the Catholic Church has really found itself,
Yeah.
where there's two kind of big things that I'm seeing. And I just, before I get into this, I know like a lot of these are hot button issues. I take a firm stance of I'm not a political person. I don't subscribe to this idea that there's an us versus them. So you can take if you don't believe that, that's fine. Take my advice or take my thoughts with a grain of salt.
Welcome to the Catholic Sinner Show, my friend.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, like, for a Catholic, there are a lot of non-Catholic ideals out there right now. And it's very easy. That's one piece of it. It's very easy to think like, we need to protect ourselves from these ideas at all costs and
Mm.
really raise the next generation without these ideas. But there's kind of an underlying fault in that when you protect your own to that extent, A, you're not going to grow. B, the people who really need you, like it's the people who have these thoughts that you think are wrong, who really need you and really need God. And how are
Yeah.
you speaking to them? How are you bringing your ideas to them when you're so worried about their ideas impressing on you? And I think
Yes.
about that a lot in regards to, like, from an advertising standpoint. The other one is kind of, there is a very close connection with political parties and the Catholic
Well,
Church, at least in my
be,
area right now.
before you go on off, you go on the political side of things, I do want to
Yeah.
comment on that, which is that there's a long history in the church of in church thought of engaging with the world, mining from it what is consistent with a Catholic perspective and leaving behind what is not, and packaging it in a way that is accessible for people. I mean, going all the way back to Thomas Aquinas borrowing from Aristotle, to St. John Paul II borrowing from phenomenology, which is about experience, but taking it and blending it with Thomism. So it's experience, but moving towards what is objectively true. Like, this is nothing new. Like, the church has always done this, but we've gotten away from it, I think, because of fear, right? This line between us Catholics and those secular people or those sinners is based on a fear because it seems so foreign to us. And there's so much opportunity out there in the world. This is the basis for this show. I'm not recommending. We have this segment which in which we look at film. I didn't say watch. I didn't say make me watch a Catholic film. I said make me watch a film that we can talk about, where, you know, it's a meeting point for a lot of people are coming together and exploring something in that art. And that's why I want to talk about video games. That's why I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. That's why I want to talk about sports, whatever it is. That's where people are, and that's what they're interested in. And to suggest that God is not in those places too is not very Catholic, actually.
Yeah, and you'll hear the hesitation in my voice, and that's not because I don't like talking about those things. It's because a lot of times I feel discouraged from talking about those things within the confines of Catholic Church. It's like this, obviously, you have to differentiate between the human experience and kind of like the dogmatic laws of the Catholic Church. Like, we live messy, crazy lives, and that's something that we have to come to terms with.
So the
And I
Catholic Sinner Show, I am the sinner. So if people are looking at this as me interviewing sinners and I'm Catholic, that's not it. I'm the sinner.
brother,
I'm the
I'm in
mess.
advertising. I think people recognize who's the sinner here.
I'm the mess. We're all the mess.
Yeah, but I was just saying, like, there's so much of this message that, as you said, is rooted in fear. And I think that's really our biggest barrier. I won't even get into the political stuff right now, but that's our biggest barrier to evangelization. Like, when's the last time I heard about, good things happening in the church outside of it? And the answer is not really, I can't remember the last time.
But of course, there are good things going on outside of the church.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's good things that are happening within the church. Like, if there was like a focus on going to soup kitchens and helping, homeless people, if there's a focus on like doing good works throughout the community, and that was the message that was getting out outside of the church, other, not like this message of, fear and hate the other. Like, if the message was kind of going back to the Beatitudes and what, Jesus did with prostitutes and tax collectors, like, that is the message that would draw people in, where people are like, I feel alienated by the world right now, and they do. Where can I feel comfort? Where can I feel home?
Yes. And what I would add to that is there are many, many Catholics that are engaging with the world and are ashamed that they're doing it because that's not publicly allowed as acceptable. People are all watching the same movies. They're watching the same television shows. I hate to break it to you, but I'd say a good majority of us swear. You know, like we swear, we're struggling along this path to God. And to feel criticized and judged within a Catholic community for our shortcomings, like that's not the message of mercy. That's not,
Mm-hmm.
that's not divine mercy in its pure sense. And like the world is more entertaining than a homily. Social media is built to be entertaining and addictive. And I'm not saying that that's all a good thing. Of course, it's problematic in certain ways. Even video games are built to be addictive. And
Mm-hmm.
but there's something to be learned about the attraction that people have towards that. There's a natural human desire that's being met in engaging in those kinds of activities. And so for the church to say that is wrong, that is bad, stay away from it. Like, why can't we nuance it? Why can't we look at those things and discover what is good and try and push back against what is not so good rather than fear the whole thing?
Yeah, and I think even when we're talking about stuff being evil, like that's not anything new. I grew up with Pokemon, Harry Potter, the Da Vinci Code. Like I've had a long history of seeing things be labeled as evil when at best it's just bad media. Um the the problem that I've encountered recently is where people start calling other people evil for
Oh,
who
yeah.
they like for the things that they're dealing with right now. Like it's bonkers to me because it's like those people that you feel are furthest away from God, they're the people who need him the most.
Father Benedict Groeschel used to say, when you get to heaven, you'll be surprised about who's there and who's not. I mean, it's true. And I think it's very easy to villainize people of a different, I mean, you find yourself to be, I mean, I think it's fair to say that you're a political moderate, right? But we see this gap between Republicans and Democrats now, where both sides villainize the other. When, believe me, I'm friends with people on both sides. They really believe that they are doing the right thing. And they're extremely well-intentioned, good people on both sides. And to create this cat, I mean, forget cancel culture. I'm not even going to speak to you if you have a different viewpoint than me. Like, it's so
Yeah.
dangerous. And that's why I wanted to create this show, so we could at least have dialogue again. I grew up in a world where it was acceptable to have any viewpoint, and you're still allowed to be at the table and talk about it. So I think you're
Yeah.
right. I think to villainize other people is very dangerous, and it doesn't recognize their humanity. There is an enemy. There is an enemy, but it's not a person. It's not a human being.
It's advertising.
Advertising is the enemy. Um,
Well, kind of. I mean, like I know what you're
it can
driving
be.
at, but at the same
It,
time,
it can be
yeah,
used for. It
you
can be
see,
used to manipulate and control people, and not used for what is good.
oftentimes it is. Especially
Yes.
when you do bring in the political side of things, like there is a real benefit to there not being collaboration. Because when we have kind of a synthesis of ideas, it's hard to count votes, right? But when you can section off specific groups, and this is, side agnostic, as you said, I would consider myself a moderate. When you are able to say, like, okay, I'm going to get this group, this value, that makes life easier for you.
Yeah.
When those people mesh and those people talk and those people coordinate, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more difficult to figure out who's going to vote for who. And that makes it a lot harder to figure out what message you're going to put on your 24-hour news cycle, depending on,
Ugh,
whatever news cycle you run. It's,
don't get
it's,
me started on
and
cable
it's all
news.
advertising.
I know, but I mean, cable news is it's literally built on making sure that you come back after the commercial. So they're going to use
Yeah.
fear to make you to come back. They're going to use like contentious language to villainize the other side of the political
Yeah.
spectrum. Basic
Yeah.
sales.
But even the people I disagree with the absolute most, I will talk to them one on one and they're good people. Like they're saying they want something or another because that's what they've experienced in their life. And we've reached this point where, especially with social media and kind of the gamification of the social experience, where
Yeah.
people think like they understand communication in its entirety. And kind of the way that I've always looked at it, which is why advertising is so fascinating to me, is I see the sum of my 37 years on this earth have led to some of the greatest experiences, some of the furthest reaching experiences. It's been the entirety of my existence, and it's just kind of a grain of sand on an entire beach. And that is human experience. What I've experienced is my experience. But
Yes.
when you think about like the entire beach and somebody who lives in, Sri Lanka and doesn't know anything about my 37 years, I can feel like my life is a big thing,
It's humbling.
but it's not. I guarantee you it's not. And then you talk to other people and you get this kind of richness of what is actual human experience. And it's a
Yeah.
collective of everybody, that I think is really fascinating. And I I always find myself, the way that I talk to people and the way that I kind of approach these things with people, especially when they are showing kind of vehement hate towards another person they don't know, is like, I wish that you could see the other people like I see them. I wish that they could see you like I see you. And if you take down kind of this preconceived notion that there's people out to get you just because you're you, then you can start to tear down those walls. Then you can start to really start to learn and think and understand and see, like, why is it that somebody thinks this way? And that is nothing but helpful from the standpoint of like, if you don't understand why somebody thinks why they think, you don't have a shot to evangelize. You can't get
Yeah.
to that person. You have
Yeah.
to put your guard down, rationalize what they're thinking, so you can come to meet them and bring them to where you're at, if
Well,
you
this
are
is
in a better
this is
place.
empathy. I mean, this is something that you grew up in a world of psychology in your home life, and that's psychology 101 is empathy. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So I think we underestimate. There was a point, I think, in the latest edition of the DSM that they were thinking about taking narcissistic personality disorder out of it because it had become commonplace for people to be narcissistic. And like at a cultural level, like narcissism is everywhere. But the antidote to narcissism is empathy. And that's what we need. We need to put ourselves in other people's shoes. You know, you brought up this point about like how it's different to be to be raised and grow up in Sri Lanka versus the United States, and that you realize that you're just one grain of sand on a very large beach. That is true. And when you encounter global citizens who've been all over the world, they'll be the first to give you that kind of perspective, to know that you're just operating from an American Western perspective, and the world is a very different place. Fine. Let's put a pin in that for a second. I do think two things are important here as a counterbalance to that. One is that we can only work with the community that we have. We can only work with what's around us. And the reality is that we are within Western culture, and we can only try and help and make headway and change and trying to improve Western culture. That's the first point. The second point is, I think there's something constitutive about wanting that unique validation, or validation for our own uniqueness and our own perspective, that speaks to our relationship with God. You know, you hear this phrase in Catholic thought that like Christ would have died on the cross just for you. If there is no one else out there, he would have done it for you. And I think there's something important about that. Like, not to be narcissistic about it, but to say that that we have our own unique dignity, and then within us is a universe, like an entire universe within each one of us that matters to us. And you can't really access it within me. Like there's a line, we call it the principle of incommunicability. You can't want for me. You can't desire for me. You can't choose for me. And the moment I say something about what's going on inside of me, it's no longer mine anymore. Now it's part of a dynamic between us. And yet, from a Catholic perspective, like the Holy Spirit is within us. God actually understands the fullness of our own universe. So it is a grain of sand in a much larger universe, but that doesn't mean from God's perspective that that grain of sand is not important.
No, absolutely. That grain of sand is absolutely important. But I think, like, especially right now, just there is such a self focus that I think the easiest thing for people to understand is that if there is no one else in the world, God would die for me.
Yeah.
The thing that I want people to understand is that if you conjure up the person that you would consider you dislike the most, even bordering on hate, God would do the same for them.
Yes.
And that's the part that I think people need to step back and understand. Like, there is a redeeming value in everybody, whether it's somebody you love with all of your heart or it's somebody who you think is just the worst.
Yeah.
That person is just as special to God as you are.
And if you scratch the surface of the choices that they're making or the thought that they are promoting, you'll find that like there are intentions and desires that you would agree with, for things like safety or communion or connection or protection. This is where psychology can help the conversation, which is that ultimately we're desiring God. And in the created order, the natural order of things, we're pursuing things that are actually a reflection of him more than anything else. And on a human level, of course, we all want security, peace, provision, whatever it is. So as you scratch the surface, you can connect with people. You get underneath it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I am really thankful for kind of my, like, I grew up here in Nebraska. I've lived out in the East Coast. I've had a pretty diverse life experience, and I've had the most religious friends, and I've also had the least religious friends.
Do you have any non-Catholic friends now?
Do I have any non-Catholic friends? I don't really have any Catholic friends, honestly. I mean, I do. That's hyperbole. But I would find myself more connecting with people who are not within the church because right now, like, it's
Hmm.
just so tied with politics, and I cannot get behind any political messages right now. It's tough for me to stomach, honestly.
Do you find it that it's hard for you to connect with your friends who are not Catholic, in terms of them not sharing the same values as you? Is there like a level of is there a level of depth that you can't get to with them?
No, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I have people, especially, like, I work in advertising. It's a very
Yeah,
diverse population. There's a lot of
sure.
the LGBT community in advertising. There's it's one of those things where, like, when I talk to somebody who is gay or trans, there is that sort of longing for being understood that's behind it. And there's kind of an empathy and understanding of people who are very different that I can connect with. It's kind of the message of people who are very ingrained in the political space right now, where you start to feel, and I'm not talking about like SJWs. I'm talking about people who are trying to live their lives but have very different lives than me. Um, it's when you have kind of this fervent need to rally the troops and circle the wagons and get very insular in your community, where I start to say, that's just not my community. Like, I were it not for kind of having to go through my own journey and being okay with being Catholic and feeling that this is the right choice for me, there is a real possibility that I wouldn't be Catholic right now. You know, like I had to come to that decision myself. And if I was discerning that decision right now in this climate, I probably wouldn't, just because it's all about circling the wagons. There's a large message of trying to shun the other at this point in time that I just don't think is very
Helpful.
Catholic.
Yeah, very Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah.